So your alarm goes off. It's 5:30 a.m.
Right, the absolute worst time of day for most people.
Yeah, exactly. You roll over and like immediately you feel it. Your calves are profoundly tight. You've got this dull ache at the base of your neck.
Oh, yeah, that classic stiffness.
Right. And there's this tiny, persistent voice in your head practically begging you to just, close your eyes for another hour. But then you reach for your phone.
Let me guess, the fitness app.
You know it. You open the app, and staring back at you is a digital badge, a 99-day running streak.
Ah, the streak, the ultimate motivator. Or, well, guilt tripper.
Exactly. Just one more day to hit 100. So you push the exhaustion down, you lace up your shoes, and you force yourself out the door. You basically convince yourself that ignoring the pain is the ultimate proof of your discipline.
It's such a common mindset, isn't it? We celebrate that grind.
We really do. But what if I told you that by stepping onto the pavement today, you aren't actually building biological resilience? What if, by refusing to stop, you're like actively programming your metabolic system to hoard visceral fat?
Wow, hoard fat. That's the exact opposite of what people want.
Right. And not just that, you might be deteriorating your neuromuscular junctions and completely bypassing the single most critical phase of physiological adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate paradox of modern fitness culture, really. We've gamified endurance to the point where we view biological recovery as like a moral failure.
A moral failure, yeah. That's a great way to put it.
We treat the human body like a linear machine, input, effort, output, results. But human physiology actually operates on a wave function. Without the trough of the wave, you can never achieve a higher peak.
And that is the exact crux of our deep dive today. Welcome, everyone. Today we are looking at a highly unusual, incredibly granular stack of sources.
Yeah, these sources are fascinating.
They really are. We have this multi-year daily medical and health log of a 63-year-old individual. And it's cross-referenced with his blood panels, weight fluctuations, even his medication pharmacology.
Which is such a rare look into real-time human biology.
Totally. And we are combining that with occupational safety research on thermodynamics, core body temperature, and some really insightful commentary on somatic awareness.
Right, so we're looking at the whole picture.
Exactly. The mission here is to deconstruct the exact physiology of the perfect exercise rhythm. Specifically, we're diving into this concept of supercompensation.
Yes, supercompensation. The idea that resting actually makes you stronger.
Right, because we need to know when it comes to a habit like a morning run, is it better to grind it out every single day, or does taking like 2 days off a week actually lead to better results?
That's the million-dollar question. Is taking a break a rigorous, biologically necessary mechanism for upgrading your basal metabolism?
Or, and this is what we all fear, is supercompensation just an intellectualized, convenient excuse for laziness?
Yeah, the I'm just listening to my body excuse. Well, to answer that, we have to completely dismantle the psychology of the everyday grind, which brings us to a concept in the source materials called somatic listening.
Somatic listening. Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So it's specifically about observing what is referred to in Japanese medicine as mibu. That translates to the pre-disease state.
Pre-disease, so not quite sick, but not well either.
Exactly. Our culture operates on a binary, you're either perfectly healthy or you're clinically injured or diseased. But MIBU is this massive gray transition zone in between.
Okay, I see.
It's basically the body communicating through subclinical signals.
And the courses refer to these signals as the body's unvoiced voices, like a sudden stiff neck or a wave of profound afternoon lethargy.
Right, or even just a slight change in your digestion. In the context of our daily runners, somatic listening is the neurobiological practice of interoception.
Interoception, that's how we feel things inside our bodies, right?
Precisely. It's your brain's ability to perceive internal sensations. The insular cortex processes these signals. Things like inflammation in a joint, glycogen depletion in the liver, or microscopic tears in your fascia.
Wow, so it's highly detailed feedback.
Very. When you wake up feeling that profound exhaustion, it isn't merely a lack of motivation. It is your central nervous system explicitly down-regulating dopamine and elevating perceived effort.
Oh, to basically force you into a state of behavioral arrest.
Exactly. It forces you to stop because it needs to rebuild.
Okay, but let me challenge this right out of the gate because I know what you, the listener, might be thinking right now.
Go for it.
Distinguishing between a genuine biological demand for a transition state and just sheer transient limbic friction, the part of the brain that just prefers being comfortable, is incredibly difficult.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very fine line.
Right. So if we rely entirely on somatic listening, are we just giving ourselves a hyper intellectual free pass to stay in bed and eat a croissant whenever we feel a little groggy?
That is the crucial distinction, and the source material is very careful to address it. Somatic listening is not about blind surrender to a feeling.
Okay, so it's not just giving up.
No, not at all. It's about rigorous interrogation of that feeling. It's the difference between central nervous system fatigue and peripheral fatigue.
How do you tell the difference in the moment, though?
Well, if you are just unmotivated, if it's limbic friction, a 5-minute warm up will usually clear it right up. Blood flow increases, catecholamines like adrenaline rise, and suddenly the lethargy vanishes.
Oh, right. You get moving, you think, okay, I actually feel great.
Exactly. But if you are experiencing true MIBU, the pre-disease accumulation of microtrauma, the stiffness and the heavy-legged feeling will persist or even worsen during the warm-up.
So if it hurts more after 5 minutes, it's real.
Yes, and ignoring that isn't discipline. It is a fundamental miscalculation of how tissue remodels.
Okay, so let's look at the mechanical reality of what happens when you miscalculate. When you push through that unvoiced voice every single day, the sources point us toward the fascia, right?
Yes, specifically discussing myofascial trigger points in areas like the gluteus minimus. The fascial network is a brilliant example of why the everyday grind fails.
And fascia is the connective tissue enveloping all your muscles, correct?
That's right. If you run every day without rest, the biomechanical load creates repetitive microtrauma.
I want to visualize this because microtrauma sounds so abstract. It's not like snapping a bone.
No, it's much smaller. Think of healthy fascia like a perfectly woven elastic silk net. It glides smoothly over the muscle fibers.
Okay, a smooth silk net. Got it.
But when you subject it to the daily, relentless impact of running, especially without allowing the 48 to 72 hour window required for fibroblast cells to synthesize new collagen, that silk net begins to sustain microscopic tears.
And the body tries to fix those tears, right?
It does, but in a panic. In response to the continuous mechanical stress, the body rushes to patch the tears, but it doesn't lay down smooth, elastic tissue. It lays down disorganized, dense scar tissue.
Oh, wow. So it's like taking a beautifully knitted wool sweater and continuously rubbing it with a hot, abrasive stone. Eventually, the wool fibers just melt and tangle into a hard, dense, inflexible knot, like it felts together.
That is an exceptionally accurate metaphor. That felted wool is a myofascial trigger point.
Yikes. That sounds painful.
It is. On a cellular level, the continuous daily running causes the sarcoplasmic reticulum inside the muscle cells to constantly leak calcium.
Wait, calcium? I thought calcium was for bones.
It is, but it also regulates muscle contraction. This excess calcium leaks out and locks the actin and myosin protein filaments into a permanent state of contraction.
So it's basically a microscopic cramp that never releases.
Exactly. And because that tiny section of muscle is permanently contracted, it physically squeezes the localized capillary beds shut.
Cutting off the blood supply.
Right. This creates local ischemia, a severe lack of oxygen and blood flow to that specific tissue. The hypoxic environment becomes highly acidic, dropping the tissue pH.
Which I'm guessing the body does not like.
Not at all. That acid aggressively stimulates the nociceptors, which are your pain nerve endings.
So when you're feeling that deep radiating ache in your hip or your calves on day 50 of your unbroken running streak, you aren't feeling like weakness leaving the body.
No, definitely not.
You are feeling the acidic, hypoxic screaming of ischemic tissue that has literally been choked off from its own blood supply, just because you refuse to let the calcium mechanisms reset.
You are systematically breaking the machine. You're forcing a state that often requires direct medical intervention, like local anesthetic injections into the trigger point, just to forcefully dilate the capillaries.
Just to break that calcium cycle. That is wild.
It really is. And this brings us directly to the physiological data in our primary source, the health logs of the 63-year-old subject.
Right, because he established a non-negotiable parameter for his routine to avoid this exact cascade, his golden rule.
He runs a maximum of 10 minutes, a minimum of 5 minutes, exactly 4 to 5 times a week, never 7.
He enforces 2 to 3 days of total rest. And he explicitly attributes this to the management of cortisol.
Cortisol is the linchpin of this entire discussion. We constantly hear it referred to as the stress hormone, but we really need to understand its actual mechanics.
Okay, so what actually is it?
Cortisol is a glucocorticoid produced by the adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys. It's controlled by the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
It's basically our evolutionary alarm system. Like if a predator jumps out of the bushes, the HPA axis floods the system with cortisol to mobilize glucose for immediate explosive energy.
In an acute, short-term scenario, cortisol is a literal lifesaver. But when you enforce a daily running streak, combined with the normal psychological stressors of modern life, you create chronic, low-grade activation of the HPA axis.
So your body just never clears the cortisol.
Exactly. And this is where the biochemistry becomes highly antagonistic to anyone trying to improve their body composition.
Because cortisol completely changes how the body handles fat, right? The logs suggest that running without rest makes the body actively try to store fat rather than burn it.
Yes, it's a complete metabolic reversal.
So how does that biological switch actually flip? I mean, how does running cause you to store fat?
It comes down to cellular receptors. Fat tissue, or adipose tissue, is not just inert blubber. It is a highly active endocrine organ.
Oh, really? I always just thought of fat as, storage.
Most people do. But visceral fat, the deep fat that surrounds your internal organs in your abdomen, has a remarkably high density of glucocorticoid receptors, much higher than the subcutaneous fat just under your skin.
So the belly fat is literally primed and waiting to catch the cortisol circulating in the blood.
Precisely. When chronic cortisol binds to those receptors in the visceral fat, it triggers an enzymatic cascade. First, it actively suppresses hormone-sensitive lipase.
And lipase is the enzyme responsible for lipolysis, right? The breaking down of stored triglycerides into free fatty acids that your body can actually burn for fuel.
Exactly. So cortisol basically shuts off the fat-burning tap, but it goes a step further.
Uh-oh.
Simultaneously, cortisol upregulates the activity of an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, specifically in the visceral region.
Okay, what does that one do?
This enzyme acts like a vacuum cleaner, actively pulling triglycerides out of the bloodstream and stuffing them into the visceral adipocytes. It causes those fat cells to physically swell.
Let's contextualize this for the listener because the implications here are just staggering. You could be waking up at dawn, grinding out a 5-mile run every single day, exhausting yourself completely.
Right, putting in all that effort.
But because you were denying the body a rest phase, your chronic cortisol levels are actively paralyzing your fat-burning enzymes and supercharging your fat-storing enzymes.
You are chemically signaling to your body, we are in an endless famine, hoard every ounce of energy around the organs.
Wow. You are fighting your own endocrinology, and endocrinology will always win.
It always wins. And we haven't even touched on the biomechanical toll yet, which is heavily detailed in the subject's medical history.
All right. The logs note a chronic issue with cervical nerve compression. He deals with radiculopathy, nerve pain, and numbness in his arms.
It got to the point where he takes pregabalin, brand name Lyrica, every night just to manage the neuropathic signals.
So how does the running affect that?
Well, consider the physics of running. Running is essentially a series of controlled, single-leg plyometric bounds. Every time your foot strikes the pavement, it generates a ground reaction force equivalent to roughly 2.5 times your body weight.
Wow. That is a massive shockwave.
It's a massive kinetic vibration, and it travels instantly up the ankle, through the tibia, the knee, the femur, the pelvis, and straight up the spinal column.
So if you have an existing vulnerability in the cervical spine-like compressed foraminal spaces where the nerves exit the spinal cord and the neck, that daily vibration acts like a jackhammer on those compromised nerve roots.
Exactly. The vibration exacerbates the local inflammation around the nerve sheath. If he ran 7 days a week, the inflammatory cytokines around the C5 or C6 vertebrae would accumulate way faster than his lymphatic system could clear them.
Meaning the nerve pain would just override any analgesic effect of the Lyrica anyway.
Right. And this is exactly why the rest days are non-negotiable. It brings us to the true definition of supercompensation.
Which is what everyone wants to know. Does resting actually do anything?
Supercompensation is not just the act of recovering back to your previous baseline. It is the physiological phenomenon where, following an adequate recovery period, the body's structural and metabolic capacities overshoot the original baseline.
Also, you don't just get back to zero, you get to like +1.
Exactly. You create a new, higher level of performance and resilience.
It's the building of the scaffolding. But I want to nail down the timeline here. If I run on Monday, what is actually happening on my rest days on Tuesday and Wednesday that constitutes this supercompensation?
It's a highly distinct, multi-phase cellular process. In the first 24 hours of rest, you enter the inflammatory phase.
Okay, phase 1, inflammation.
Macrophages, which are a type of white blood cell, flood the microtraumacytes in the muscle and fascia. They act as the cleanup crew, literally phagocytizing or eating away the damaged cellular debris.
So if I run again at hour 24, I am basically interrupting the cleanup crew right in the middle of their shift.
You're firing the cleanup crew and just causing more damage. But if you wait until the 48 to 72 hour mark, you enter the proliferation and remodeling phases.
And what happens then?
This is when satellite cells, which are basically dormant stem cells residing on the outside of your muscle fibers, are activated. They migrate to the site of the microtears, multiply, and physically fuse with the existing muscle fibers.
Oh, they donate their nuclei to the muscle cell.
Exactly. This increases the cross-sectional area of the muscle fiber and reinforces the fascial collagen matrix. But this fusion, this actual act of growing stronger, requires a massive amount of ATP cellular energy.
And a completely stress-free hormonal environment to synthesize the new proteins.
Yes, zero cortisol.
So the idea that rest is passive is just entirely backward. The running is simply the architectural blueprint, the request for a stronger body. The rest days are the actual construction phase where the bricks are laid.
That's a great way to look at it.
I think we had this analogy earlier in our prep notes. It's like spending money from your bank account. Running every day is like spending money without ever waiting for your paycheck to clear.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah, the rest days are when the deposit actually hits the account.
Yeah.
If you never take the scaffolding down, the building never stands on its own.
That perfectly frames it. But the subject's logs introduce another variable that completely upends traditional fitness dogma.
Okay, lay it on me.
We've established that he takes 2 days off, but on his active days, he is only running for 5 to 10 minutes. The logs specifically quantify this as 800 to 1,500 steps.
Which is astonishingly brief. I mean, conventional aerobic wisdom, the kind you see plastered on treadmill consoles and in magazines, insists you need at least 30 to 45 minutes of sustained elevated heart rate to enter the mythical fat burning zone.
Right. But the data in the health logs completely invalidates that requirement for this specific metabolic adaptation. Let's look at the hard outcomes.
Yeah, what did this routine actually do for him?
Over the course of implementing this specific routine, a 5 to 9 minute run, 4 to 5 days a week, combined with restricting excess daily sugar, the subject's weight dropped from the 66 kilogram range down to 62.5 kilograms.
Wow. And for his recorded height of 171.4 centimeters, that puts his body mass index at exactly 21.2 to 21.3.
Which, medically speaking, is the statistical apex for all-cause mortality reduction and metabolic health. He didn't just lose weight, he optimized his entire physical frame.
Okay, so we have to explain the mechanism here. How does a 5-minute run, which might burn a grand total of 40 or 50 calories like, barely the equivalent of half an apple, achieve what people spend hours on an elliptical machine trying to replicate?
It requires a paradigm shift. We have to stop viewing exercise solely as an accounting equation of calories in versus calories burned.
Okay, so if it's not burning calories, what is it doing?
The 5-minute run is not an energy expenditure tool. It is an epigenetic signaling mechanism.
Okay, let's trace the signal. The logs note a critical detail. He does this run first thing in the morning, immediately after waking up.
This timing is absolutely everything. After an overnight fast, your hepatic glycogen, the stored sugar in your liver, is significantly depleted from keeping your brain functioning all night. Your insulin levels are at rock bottom.
So the body is already primed to look for alternative fuel sources.
Exactly. When you suddenly demand intense, albeit brief, muscular contraction from the legs in this semi-fasted state, you create an immediate acute energy crisis inside the muscle cells.
An energy crisis.
Yes. The cells rapidly burn through their localized ATP. When ATP breaks down, it turns into AMP adenosine monophosphate.
And a sudden spike in AMP is the alarm bell for the cell.
It is the specific trigger for an enzyme called AMPK, or AMP activated protein kinase. AMPK is the master metabolic switch.
Master switch. I like the sound of that.
When it senses the severe energy deficit, it panics. It realizes the cell is fundamentally under-equipped to handle this sudden demand for energy.
So what does AMPK actually do when it panics?
It activates a downstream cascade, most notably upregulating a transcriptional coactivator called PGC1 alpha. And PGC1 alpha is the holy grail of metabolic health.
Why is it the holy grail?
Because it is the primary driver of mitochondrial biogenesis.
It physically forces the muscle cells to build brand new mitochondria.
Yes, it increases both the sheer number of mitochondria and the enzymatic density within the existing ones. And the mitochondria are where beta oxidation occurs.
Which means?
It's the only place in the body where fat is actually burned for fuel.
This completely explains the 5-minute paradox. It's not about the duration, it's about crossing the intensity threshold necessary to trigger the AMPK pathway.
Precisely. A gentle hour-long stroll after a heavy breakfast might burn more immediate calories, but it never triggers that cellular energy crisis because blood glucose is readily available.
So the body never feels the need to upgrade the engine.
Exactly. The 5-minute fasted run acts as a biological ignition switch. It demands a software update for the metabolism. By continuously triggering mitochondrial biogenesis 4 to 5 days a week, the subject fundamentally elevated his basal metabolic rate, or BMR.
He increased the sheer volume of fat-burning factories in his tissue,
Yes.
which means the actual fat loss isn't happening during the 5 minutes he's jogging. It's happening during the other 23 hours and 55 minutes of the day.
It is happening while he sits at his desk. It is happening while he sleeps. His resting state has become highly metabolically active, and the logs provide a brilliant, real-time demonstration of this engine at work.
Oh yes, the late March data point. It's a fascinating anomaly in the logs. He attends a dinner party, a social obligation where he predictably overeats.
We've all been there.
Right. The logs show his weight rapidly spiking from the low 63s up to 64.4 kilograms over just a couple of days.
Now, in a metabolically rigid body, someone who has dieted their metabolism down to a crawl, that sudden influx of calories would be instantly shuttled into visceral fat storage.
And it would take weeks of severe restriction to return to baseline.
But look at his timeline. The weight hits 64.4 kilograms, but by March 31st, just a handful of days later, the weight completely collapses back down to a record low for the month, 62.9 kilograms.
That is just incredible. That is the definition of metabolic flexibility.
The massive density of newly built mitochondria simply took that excess caloric substrate from the dinner party, upregulated their oxidative phosphorylation, and burned it off as heat.
The engine is so large and efficient that it simply revs higher to clear the excess fuel.
Exactly. But, you cannot run a high-performance engine without very specific fueling and cooling parameters.
Which brings us to the meticulous pre-run routine documented in the logs. Let's talk about the fuel.
The preparation is just as clinical as the run itself. The sequence is rigid. Upon waking, he consumes exactly 200 to 250 cubic centimeters of water, followed immediately by exactly 1 spoonful of raw honey.
Let's dissect the honey. Why is he taking a direct shot of sugar right before a fasted run? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of being in a fasted state?
It seems like it would, right?
Yeah, like why not eat half a banana or a piece of whole grain toast for complex carbohydrates?
To understand the honey, we have to look deeply into his gastroenterological history. The logs reveal a chronic battle with reflux esophagitis, severe acid reflux, as well as a history of stomach and duodenal ulcers.
Ouch. So his gastric mucosa, the lining of his stomach, is highly compromised.
Very compromised. So if he were to eat a complex carbohydrate like toast, the stomach would have to initiate mechanical digestion. It would secrete hydrochloric acid and begin a violent churning motion to break down the starches.
And if you combine a stomach full of hydrochloric acid and churning solid food with the high-impact bouncing of a morning run,
you're creating massive intra-abdominal pressure,
which forces the acid up against the lower esophageal sphincter. For someone with reflux esophagitis, that is a guaranteed recipe for severe heartburn, nausea, and potentially exacerbating an ulcer.
But honey completely circumvents this mechanical digestion process.
Wait, how? It's still food.
It is biologically unique. Honey is an invert sugar. The bees have already added the enzyme invertase to the nectar, which breaks the complex sucrose down into free monosaccharides, primarily fructose and glucose.
Oh, meaning the sugar is entirely pre-digested by the bees.
Exactly. It requires zero mechanical churning. It barely impacts the gastric emptying rate. When the honey hits the small intestine, the glucose is immediately actively transported across the intestinal wall via the SGLT1 transporter.
And the fructose.
The fructose moves passively via the GLUT5 transporter. It is a direct instant injection of readily available ATP precursors into the bloodstream.
So it provides an immediate cognitive boost to the brain to clear the sleep inertia, right?
Yes, and it provides just enough circulating blood glucose to prevent the body from entering a highly catabolic state where it starts breaking down muscle tissue for fuel during the run.
But because the volume is so small, just one spoonful,
Right.
it doesn't spike insulin enough to shut down the AMPK fat burning cascade we talked about earlier.
It is a pharmacologically perfect workaround for a compromised digestive system.
That's brilliant. But the fueling is only half the equation. The occupational health sources in our stack provide a fascinating counterintuitive approach to the cooling system.
Yes, specifically the temperature of that 200 cc of pre-run water.
The slides on thermodynamics and heat stroke are incredible. They explicitly differentiate between core body temperature, the internal thermal environment of the organs, and the brain, which must remain rigorously near 37 degrees Celsius, and shell temperature.
Which is the fluctuating temperature of the skin and extremities.
Right, so when you initiate muscular contraction, the process is highly inefficient. Only about 20% of the ATP is converted into actual kinetic movement.
And the other 80% is released as pure metabolic heat.
So within seconds of starting that run, the core temperature begins to climb.
And the body's primary defense mechanism against hyperthermia is to dramatically vasodilate the cutaneous capillary beds.
Meaning it shunts massive volumes of blood away from the internal organs and pushes it to the skin to dissipate the heat through sweat evaporation.
But pushing all that blood to the skin creates a cardiovascular strain. It lowers the central blood volume, meaning the heart has to pump faster, increasing the heart rate, just to maintain cardiac output.
This is where the occupational research provides a brilliant intervention. The data shows that ingesting 4 degrees Celsius water refrigerated, cold water, immediately prior to and during exertion actively blunts the rise in core body temperature.
I know, it sounds so simple.
I have to push back here, though, because there is a very persistent belief in the holistic health world that drinking freezing cold water first thing in the morning shocks the vagus nerve.
Oh, yes, I've heard that.
Yeah, that it causes severe gastric cramping and drastically slows down digestion because the stomach has to heat the water up before it can pass into the intestines.
It is a valid concern, but it is entirely dependent on volume. If you chug a full liter of ice water, yes, you risk triggering a strong vagovagal reflex that can cause the stomach to spasm and delay gastric emptying.
But the subject is strictly consuming 200 to 250 cc, just a small glass.
Exactly. So it's a localized thermal sink. That 200 cc's of cold water sits in the stomach, and through simple conductive heat transfer, it absorbs the rapidly rising metabolic heat from the surrounding vascular network of the core.
It acts as an internal radiator fluid.
It really does, which means the core temperature stays stable longer, the brain doesn't panic.
And the autonomic nervous system doesn't have to forcefully shunt as much blood to the skin to sweat. You preserve your stroke volume, lower your heart rate, and significantly decrease the overall physiological stress of the run.
You are maximizing the specific stimulus of the run, the muscular contraction and the AMPK activation, while minimizing the systemic fatigue.
And this thermal regulation brings us directly into the biochemistry of rehydration post-run. The occupational safety slides dedicate a massive amount of space to clarifying the profound confusion surrounding sports drinks.
Yes, the direct comparison between Pocari Sweat, Aquarius, and OS1.
Because if you go to a gym or just walk down the street in the summer, you see people constantly chugging these drinks interchangeably, assuming they all do the exact same thing.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of osmotic pressure and intestinal absorption.
Let's start with Pocari Sweat. The source material explains that Pocari is formulated to closely mimic the exact electrolyte composition of human extracellular fluid.
It is relatively isotonic, meaning it has a high concentration of sodium and carbohydrates.
It's designed to replace massive fluid loss, right?
Correct. It utilizes the sodium-glucose co-transporter mechanism in the gut. For every molecule of glucose and sodium absorbed, hundreds of molecules of water are dragged across the intestinal wall via osmosis.
So it's basically for emergencies.
Yes. Pocari is engineered for pathological states.
Yeah.
Fever, gastrointestinal illness with severe diarrhea, or recovering from a grueling multi-hour shift in extreme heat where you have sweated out massive amounts of sodium.
But our subject is running for 5 minutes. He hasn't depleted his plasma sodium levels.
Exactly. So if he chugs an isotonic high-sodium drink like Pocari after a brief run, He is introducing an unnecessary osmotic load and excess sugar that his body now has to process and excrete.
Which is why the source advocates for a drink like Aquarius for general athletic recovery instead.
Aquarius is formulated differently. It is generally hypotonic, meaning it has a lower concentration of sodium and sugar than blood plasma, allowing for rapid fluid absorption without the heavy sodium load.
But more importantly, the sources highlight that it is fortified with citric acid and branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs. What is the specific mechanism of the citric acid here?
Citric acid is a direct intermediate in the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, which is the primary metabolic pathway inside the mitochondria that generates ATP.
So it feeds the mitochondria.
By ingesting citric acid post-run, you are providing direct substrate to the mitochondria to rapidly replenish cellular energy stores, drastically reducing the perception of fatigue.
And the amino acids prevent the muscle tissue from entering a catabolic breakdown state. Okay, so that handles Picari and Aquarius, but we have to talk about OS1.
Yes, we do.
The occupational health doctors in the source material dedicate a specific urgent slide to warning against the daily use of oral rehydration solutions like OS1.
And they warn against the widespread reliance on salt tablets as well. The doctors are combating a very dangerous cultural mythology here.
OS1 is an oral rehydration solution, an ORS. Its formulation is strictly guided by the World Health Organization's parameters for treating clinical dehydration.
It is medicine. It is a pharmaceutical grade ratio of sodium to glucose designed to force water into the bloodstream when the body is in crisis.
So if a healthy person, or our 5-minute runner, treats OS1 as an everyday casual hydration drink, what happens?
They're rapidly increasing their serum sodium levels. They are risking hypernatremia, which forces the kidneys to work overtime to filter out the excess salt.
And paradoxically increases blood pressure and cellular dehydration. The slide explicitly states OS1 is not the ultimate prevention.
It creates a dangerous false sense of security. The doctors note that workers will take a salt tablet, drink a bottle of OS1, and think they have created a chemical shield against heat stroke.
Because they feel protected by the salt, they start neglecting the true, non-negotiable pillars of thermoregulation and health. Salt alone cannot prevent heat stroke.
Exactly. They neglect proper water intakes, they refuse to take adequate breaks, they ignore sleep deprivation.
And they fail to allow their bodies to undergo heat acclimatization, the physiological process where the body actually learns to sweat earlier and excrete less sodium over a period of 2 weeks.
They are looking for a chemical hack to bypass the biological requirement of rest. And this connects the entire deep dive together. You cannot out-supplement a lack of supercompensation.
Right, you cannot use OS1 to fix chronic sleep deprivation, and you cannot use daily running to out-train a chronically inflamed system.
But when you actually align these mechanisms,
When you combine the somatic listening to catch the MIBU state, the strict 2 days of supercompensation to clear the cortisol and rebuild the fascia, the mitochondrial biogenesis from the 5-minute fasted run, and the precise low-impact fueling of honey and cold water.
the data in the logs reveals something astonishing. It reveals a systemic healing cascade.
A massive interconnected domino effect where one targeted intervention resolves multiple, seemingly unrelated chronic pathologies. Let's track these dominoes, starting with his gastroenterological health.
We discussed his upper GI tract, the acid reflux, but his lower GI tract was in a state of severe chronic dysfunction.
The logs are incredibly detailed here. Prior to this routine, the subject was experiencing up to 7 bowel movements a day,
7 a day is bordering on chronic low-grade diarrhea.
and he explicitly notes a constant lingering feeling of residual stool tenesmus, the sensation that the bowel is never fully empty.
Which is a mechanical nightmare when you consider his other documented condition, a history of internal hemorrhoids dating back to his 30s.
Hemorrhoids are essentially varicose veins in the rectum, right? The vascular plexus becomes engorged with blood.
Yes. So if he is going to the bathroom 7 times a day with a feeling of incomplete evacuation, he is constantly straining.
That sustained intra-abdominal pressure prevents the venous blood from draining out of the hemorrhoids, trapping him in a cycle of inflammation and daily discomfort.
But then we see a massive shift in the data, triggered initially by a severe bout of diarrhea in mid-February that forced him to reevaluate his somatic inputs.
Right, he completely eliminates his daily excess sweets. He admits he was eating 2 or more pastries every single day, and he locks in the 5 to 9 minute morning run.
The results are immediate. The bowel movements normalize to 2 to 3 times a day, with a complete satisfying feeling of emptiness.
How does a 5-minute run and dropping a pastry fix a lifelong hemorrhoidal and transit time issue?
It is a perfect synergy of removing a chemical stressor and adding a mechanical stimulus. Let's look at the subtraction first.
The sugar.
Excess refined sugar rapidly alters the osmotic gradient in the gut lumen. It pulls excess water into the intestines, causing the loose, frequent stools. Furthermore, unabsorbed sugars feed the fermenting bacteria in the microbiome, creating excess gas and disrupting the formation of a solid stool bolus.
So cutting the sugar stops the osmotic diarrhea and stabilizes the bacterial fermentation. But what about the running? How does the physical act of jogging impact the colon?
It comes down to the migrating motor complex and parasympathetic tone. The gastrointestinal tract is heavily innervated by the enteric nervous system.
So movement helps.
Yes. The physical, rhythmic, up and down oscillation of the morning run acts as a literal mechanical massage for the ascending, transverse, and descending colon.
It's physical perturbation.
Exactly. This mechanical bouncing, combined with the subsequent release of endorphins post-run, shifts the autonomic nervous system away from sympathetic fight or flight tension and deeply into parasympathetic rest and digest dominance.
Which triggers healthy coordinated peristalsis.
Right, the smooth, wave-like muscle contractions that efficiently propel the stool through the colon.
And because the stool is now properly formed and moving efficiently, he stops straining. The intra-abdominal pressure drops, the venous blood finally drains from the hemorrhoidal plexus, and the physical discomfort vanishes.
He cured a vascular issue in his rectum by running for 5 minutes and letting his gut bacteria stabilize.
That is the beauty of systemic biology. And the dominoes keep falling upward, directly into his respiratory system and his sleep architecture. The medical records note a history of sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea is terrifying. The pharyngeal airway literally collapses while you are unconscious, cutting off oxygen to the brain, forcing you to wake up gasping for air dozens of times a night.
The mechanics of sleep apnea are governed by Poiseuille's law, right? Which states that resistance to airflow in a tube is inversely proportional to the radius of the tube to the fourth power.
Meaning, even a microscopic narrowing of the airway creates an exponential increase in airway resistance.
And what causes the airway to narrow?
In many cases, it is the physical mechanical load of visceral fat accumulating around the neck and the pharyngeal tissue.
Oh, wow. So when the subject was sitting at his baseline of 66 kilograms, that excess adipose tissue was physically crushing his airway the moment his throat muscles relaxed in deep sleep.
The logs showed the devastation this caused. He was waking up after less than 5 hours of fragmented, hypoxic, miserable sleep. His brain was constantly bathed in the stress hormones required to shock him awake to breathe.
But watch the cascade. The morning fasted run triggers AMPK. PGC1 alpha builds the mitochondria.
The new mitochondrial engine begins to rapidly oxidize that specific metabolically active visceral fat. As he drops from 66 kilograms down to 62.5, the fat pads around his neck physically shrink.
Mechanical obstruction is removed. The radius of the airway increases, and according to Poiseuille's law, the airflow resistance plummets.
The logs report a life-changing shift. He goes from less than 5 hours of broken sleep to achieving a solid, uninterrupted 6 hours of high-quality, deep, slow-wave sleep. He achieves complete sleep consolidation.
And we have objective clinical imaging to prove that his respiratory mechanics fundamentally changed. Look at the chest x-ray data in the logs.
In 2024, before these habits were fully integrated, his chest x-ray was graded an A2.
What does that mean?
It showed pleural adhesions, which are essentially minor bands of scar tissue between the lung and the chest wall, and increased lung markings in the right lung, indicating minor chronic inflammation or congestion.
But the 2025 x-ray, taken after a year of this supercompensation routine,
Upgraded to an A complete resolution, no abnormalities detected.
wait, how does running clear pleural adhesions?
Forced vital capacity. When you sit at a desk all day, you breathe shallowly. The lower lobes of the lungs rarely fully expand.
But when you initiate that morning run, your brain demands oxygen. You take deep, forceful diaphragmatic breaths.
This maximum expansion of the thoracic cavity physically stretches the pulmonary parenchyma, breaking up minor adhesions and increasing the mechanical compliance of the lung tissue. The lungs literally stretch themselves back to full health.
It is breathtaking to see the data align perfectly with the biology. But the final and perhaps most complex domino falls in the blood chemistry, specifically the lipid panels and hepatic function.
The blood markers are the ultimate, irrefutable proof of the metabolic software update.
In early 2025, his LDL cholesterol, the low-density lipoproteins that penetrate the arterial endothelium and cause atherosclerotic plaque, was elevated at 159 milligrams per deciliter.
His HbA1c, which measures the percentage of hemoglobin coated in sugar over a 3-month period, was creeping up to 5.6%.
He was standing right on the precipice of metabolic syndrome. But the most alarming number in the entire blood panel was his gamma GT.
Gamma glutamyltransferase. This is a critical liver enzyme. A healthy normal range is typically under 50 UL. The subject's gamma GT was sitting at a highly concerning 125.
Now, normally a gamma GT that high is an immediate red flag for heavy alcohol consumption or severe biliary tract disease. But the logs are explicit. He is a non-drinker. He doesn't consume alcohol.
So what is physically destroying his liver cells to cause them to leak this enzyme into his blood?
It was a mystery until you cross-reference his diet with his incredibly dense pharmacological load. We have to look at the first-pass metabolism in the liver.
Every night, this subject was swallowing 10 different pharmaceutical pills. 2 tablets for restless leg syndrome, 2 tablets for prostate health, and 6 tablets of pregabalin lyrica to manage the cervical nerve pain we discussed earlier.
The liver is the body's chemical filtration plant. When you drop 10 pills into the stomach simultaneously, they're absorbed into the portal vein and routed directly to the liver.
Specifically, they hit the cytochrome P450 enzymatic pathways in the liver. These enzymes are responsible for metabolizing and detoxifying foreign chemicals.
When you dump 6 Lyrica tablets into the system at once, you create a massive spike in the peak plasma concentration, known as the Cmax. You completely saturate the liver's ability to process the chemical.
Exactly. The enzymes are overwhelmed. Add to that the fact that he was eating 2 pastries a day.
The liver was simultaneously trying to metabolize a toxic pharmacological load while also trying to convert a massive influx of fructose into triglycerides through a process called de novo lipogenesis.
The liver was choking. It was developing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease while actively fighting chemical toxicity, hence the severe cellular stress and the gamma GT spike to 125.
And because the liver couldn't clear the Lyrica efficiently, it remained in his bloodstream at toxic levels straight through the night.
Which explains why he was waking up with severe, debilitating morning somnolence and grogginess. The drug was still actively sedating his central nervous system.
So the intervention here requires sheer pharmacological precision. He couldn't just stop taking the Lyrica, or the nerve pain from his neck would be agonizing.
Under medical advice, he implements 2 massive changes. First, the new mitochondrial density from the running begins oxidizing the excess stored fat in the liver, clearing out the de novo lipogenesis backlog.
Second, he alters the pharmacokinetics of the Lyrica by splitting the dose.
Instead of taking all 6 pills at bedtime, he takes 3 after dinner and the remaining 3 right before bed.
By splitting the dose, he completely changes the area under the curve and the peak plasma concentration. He dramatically lowers the Cmax.
The drug enters the hepatic portal system in a slow, manageable wave rather than a massive tsunami.
The cytochrome P450 enzymes can easily process 3 pills. A few hours later, they process the next 3. The liver is never overwhelmed.
The gamma GT drops. The drug is efficiently cleared from his system before morning, and he wakes up sharp, alert, and biologically ready for his 5-minute run. It is a flawless, virtuous cycle.
And it perfectly encapsulates the expert commentary found in the source material, which compares this optimized, supercompensated state to childhood.
When I first read that, I thought it was just a poetic flourish, but after dissecting the mechanisms, it is biologically exact. Look at the physiological behavior of a child.
A child does not force themselves to run on a treadmill at his own 2 heart rate for 60 minutes while ignoring knee pain.
A child sprints across a playground at maximum intensity for 5 minutes until they were entirely breathless, triggering that AMTK pathway, and then they completely collapse into a state of total rest.
They drink when they're thirsty. They don't overhydrate with clinical sodium solutions. They eat simple, easily digestible energy. They sleep so deeply you can barely wake them. And their gastrointestinal transit is effortless.
By establishing a minimum effective dose of stress, the 5-minute run, and enforcing a mandatory period of absolute supercompensation, the 2 days off, this 63-year-old subject didn't just lose weight.
He systematically unfelts his fascia. He reversed his sleep apnea by mechanically opening his airway. He restored his parasympathetic gut motility, and he saved his liver from pharmacological toxicity. He returned his physiology to its factory settings.
He found the biological default mode. If he had succumbed to the pressure of the digital app, if he had gritted his teeth and forced a 7-day-a-week running streak, the unyielding cortisol would have locked the visceral fat around his airway.
The repetitive kinetic vibration would have worsened the cervical nerve compression, requiring more lyrica, which would have further toxified his liver, making the morning grogginess unbearable.
Supercompensation, the sheer biological courage to stop and rebuild, was the keystone that held the entire physiological architecture together. You cannot build a stronger, resilient organism without honoring the phase of transcription, translation, and tissue remodeling.
Rest is not the absence of progress, it is the exact moment progress is biologically materialized.
It really is.
So let's crystallize this entire journey for you, the listener. If you take away absolutely nothing else from this deep dive into the biochemistry of habits, let it be this. Taking 2 days off a week from your workout is not a concession to laziness. It is not a failure of your willpower.
It is a non-negotiable, rigorously proven requirement for human physiological adaptation.
It prevents chronic cortisol from paralyzing your fat-burning enzymes. It protects your fascial matrix from felting into ischemic trigger points.
Yeah.
And it gives your newly triggered PGC1 alpha pathway the undisturbed time it needs to construct the mitochondrial factories that will permanently upgrade your basal metabolic rate.
You have to step away from the work to let the work take effect.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to carry with you today. We are existing in a fitness culture that is entirely obsessed with digital gamification. Our wrists vibrate, our phones send us push notifications, and algorithms reward us with little bursts of pixelated confetti for unbroken streaks.
100 days of running, 300 days of lifting. We wear these digital badges as unimpeachable proof of our moral superiority and discipline.
But what if those algorithms are fundamentally blind to our endocrinology? What if those digital streaks are actually actively dismantling our deep biological program?
Exactly. What if the ultimate sign of discipline isn't blindly pushing through the acidic burning in your calves to satisfy a line of code on your phone?
What if true elite mastery of your health means cultivating the deep interoceptive awareness to recognize MIBU? What if the bravest, most highly optimized action you can take for your metabolism today is the intentional decision to do absolutely nothing at all?
It takes far more neurological restraint and intelligence to rest strategically than it does to run blindly.
It really does. We want health to be linear. We want the unbroken streak. But the profound truth hidden in these medical logs is that human biology is not a straight line. It is a rhythm of stress and profound recovery.
It's the vital, quiet magic of supercompensation.
So tomorrow morning, when that 5:30 a.m. alarm goes off and your calves are aching, maybe the most scientifically productive thing you can do for your body is to turn the alarm off, go back to sleep, and let the engine rebuild.